before we go on, I also request you to put your mobiles on silent in case anybody may not have done so. Always be useful. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ullas Karanth to speak to us today on a subject that would be close to all our hearts, rescuing nature from growth and equity, a subject on which we've had many discussions here in this very hall in the recent past, and a person of his distinction to add to our understanding of it is only too welcome. He is, I think you've got the paper before you, perhaps you've seen all the details of his work so far, but one of his more important books, The Way of the Tiger, A View from the Maidan and Science of Saving Tigers. Besides his many activities in wildlife conservation, membership of wildlife studies, societies, and the Bombay Naturalist Society, he is a distinguished authority on the National Tiger Conservation Policy, and is a member of the Conservation Authority and the governing body of the Wildlife Institute of India. He's been awarded the Sierra Club International Earth Care Award in 2006 and the Paul Getty Award of the World Wildlife Fund in 2007. But it's especially pleasing to know that he's received the Salim Award, Ali Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Bombay Natural History Society. So it's very widely spread out in the whole world of natural conservation and studies, and we've got a person who's with this encyclopedic background and authority to speak to us on this subject, rescuing nature from growth and equity. I think the title itself tells us a substantial amount of what it is. It concerns and the shifting nature of that relationship with nature that we have to face up to. There are no simple solutions, as we've been repeatedly reminded in our previous conferences here. And how exactly we conceive of conservation in the conditions in which we are placed is what we have to ponder very deeply. And nobody could do it better with us than Dr. Ullas Karanth. I call upon now to address us.
Thank you, Professor Palak, for that introduction. I'm a little daunted because I had expected, last time I talked, it was a huge hall with a lot of people, and this is a small, more cozy place, and also a lot of people who are already in the know about conservation. So I was prepared for something else. So there was a lot of slides. It was meant for a more general audience. I didn't realize that the format would be this, and there'll be people who are more deeply into this subject. Anyway, Mahesh, of course, being a social scientist, wants me to sit down and talk. You know, the difference is the ecologists always stand up and give their talks, and social scientists always sit down and talk. It really restrains somebody like me. Okay. No, it's okay. Okay. I've put a subtitle there. The topic is about kind of a broadly defined nature, how it's underfed from two sources of pressures. One is what we call economic growth, which is typically identified as the urban industrial lobby, and the other one is the equity business. Let's spread it out first, and that's typically caricatured as poor rural people who do no harm to nature. So, you know, how do we rescue nature from this, in this context of somewhat polemical debate that's been going on? And I've added the subtitle later because my real deeper knowledge is about this one species, so I'll kind of, all my illustrations come from that one species while sticking to this bigger topic. wild nature. There was a hypothesis, the idea of progress and development has been that this stuff is not really important. It doesn't really matter for us. And this idea has been for a long time. And even the environmental movement in the early years, Rachel Carson and others, it was about making the earth a better place for us, less toxins and whatever. Environmentalism was not about nature per se, it was about making the world more healthy for us. It was Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock who proposed in the original Gaia hypothesis, which was kind of caricatured a lot in later years, but over time what they proposed was different. Evolution, biological evolution was seen purely as a consequence, something that stands up on geological changes. It was not seen to have had a major role in shaping what the earth is today. But what they proposed was that actually the biological evolution, particularly microbes and bacteria 300 million years ago, have had a feedback loop with geological and chemical cycles, and today earth is habitable because of that. So when Lovelock proposed this, he was laughed off. And today much of what they said, actually the people who fought them the hardest were my tribe, the ecologists and the evolutionary biologists like Dawkins. The people who absorbed them most avidly were the climate scientists and the earth science groups. So now that's become more or less a part of what is known as earth system sciences. That action of natural systems has a major role in making the earth habitable for larger vertebrates like us. So today, this nature, let's say for example in 55, when Mao took power in China, the idea of progress was to completely eliminate nature, because it was a hindrance to progress. Everything from sparrow had to be, our policy was actually to completely deforest, and most of the parties had on their manifestos an agenda for clearing forests which were viewed as wastelands. So now we know better, and we think a large part of the earth should be maintained in as natural a state as possible. We need to reclaim nature, and this of course is a huge challenge in terms of reclaiming it with all its complexity, of all the interrelationships between plants and animals. So that's what I'm going to address. And particularly in the context of India, if you look at it, we like to compare ourselves to US all the time. So we have 1/3 the land area, we have 4 times as many people, and we have 60 to 70% of the population depending on land for agriculture or livelihood, depending on biomass in the form of wood or other biomass, energy, all of this comes. So it's a very different situation. Superimposed on this, we have now a modern economy that's growing at 6 to 8% depending on who's arguing. So this puts a tremendous amount of pressure on nature resources in India. And this makes us somewhat unique, because we are almost like an experimental lab. If things work here, they should work anywhere else, because it's like I've been to the future, I've seen how it works. We are already in the future as far as Africa and Latin America are concerned. So what goes on in this experience is really important. The consequence of this pressure and growth has been, this is a map of the forest cover of India. The top left there showing what it was probably a couple of thousand years ago, and the top right showing the general. This is what somewhat natural forest. There's no pristine forest in India. Then human beings walked across from Africa 60,000 years ago. People invented fire 1 million years ago. So there's nothing pristine about it, but somewhat natural systems are now fragmented, and I would say cover about 10% of the land, although the legal area is double that. And I'm looking in the lower corner at the landscape that I work and which has been my lab in some sense, the Western Ghats of Karnataka. In that landscape and that strip of land in which the deep green show protected areas, the light green shows the forest cover, there are 12 million people, 1.2 crore people there. And on the right is a single protected area of Dandelion, and all those red dots represent people. So So this interspersion of people combined with the demands and of both from the rural, what I call the equity sector as well as from the growth sector, show special challenges for us. So preserving natural, this is a watershed of Kudramukh, and and these areas are important for other reasons. I don't want to go into it because this is particularly a well-informed audience. The functionalities include watershed functions. It includes potential fuels, fibers, chemicals that are locked up in these places, in addition to the larger role of stabilizing the ecosystem. So the value of this is now recognized. Almost no country today has a policy to destroy nature. On paper, everybody signs the Convention on Climate, Convention on Biodiversity. It's the practice where the problem is. The problem that all of us face in daily life. So preserving this whole complex, at least in some parts of the land, is really the challenge. And we look at this, is there really room for tigers here? Is the question that in some sense we are asking. And clearly some of these are this is the same watershed that I showed in Kudramukh after it's mined how it looks. So a set of these pressures come from the growth, the urbanization, the demographic shift, and the economic growth per se. Now some people say this is a conspiracy, which I don't tend to agree. I think this is driven by so many things, including people's increased aspirations and consumption. So there is a set of threats that we clearly recognize, like mining, in this case, large reservoirs, and increasingly driven by subsidies, what is claimed to be green projects or green energy. This is microhydro. Hundreds of these are ripping the most fragile parts of the world, and they are not even economically viable. They are subsidized. Their power purchase agreements are 4 to 5 times, and basically most of them are owned by individual politicians or some powerful people. Same with windmills. A good technology in a few places, but certainly applied on a scale and driven by completely artificial economics. So these are some of the threats. The first one is very well recognized. The green threat from the modern sector is not yet recognized. A lot of people think this is all green. The damage to birds from turbines is well documented abroad, but we are not heeding those, what's being done. Country needs a modern transportation system. The highway authority's mandate is to upgrade existing areas, existing alignments, what they call alignments. Now, this would be a tragic mistake. Given that we have less than 3% or 4% in protected nature, we need to go around that, not through it, because the consequences of putting a modern highway system through the existing existing protected area system is tragic, and it's unnecessary because you're spending 50,000 crores. You have to go around, you have to go over, you have to build structures. This is because you're anyway saving a huge amount. So these are the kind of threats that we very readily recognize. We as conservationists recognize. And we have this modern economy that's growing, information technology in Bengaluru being a typical example. What this is doing is actually increasing disposable income, creating a very large middle class. Now this could be a class, this is a class actually that supports conservation, by and large, has been and always has been. I come from this class, Salim Ali came from this class, so we all got it. But this class, which could be a friend of wildlife also in terms of managing natural lands for tourism, today is becoming a problem. So these threats are kind of being recognized to different degrees. There is another set of threats. The very interesting point is the people who recognize the first set of threats somehow fail to recognize the second set of threats that I show. And it's the other way around also. People who recognize this as a threat often fail to recognize the other set of threats. So this is typical demand for rural biomass. We have 20% of the world's livestock on 5% of the world's land. Pressures such as forest fires, these are all growing saplings that are being cut to go to the fireplace. Use of bamboos and other biomass from the forest, timber, whatever, for household use. Harvest of things like BD leaves. This is a garcinia that's used in making a drug that reduces obesity. From a traditional curry plant, it became a mass-produced export commodity. So we often don't see these as threats. And the market linkages that have now burgeoned globally, the global and large markets created in India for these products are a huge threat to natural systems. So when we look at this gamut of threats and we say, let's save nature, so we have to look also closely and say, what is nature? Because a standard polemical answer saying this is nature, this is not nature, this is bad for nature, this is good for nature is not nuanced enough, I believe, to address some of these questions. Clearly there are species that do very well in the presence of man. For example, mongoose, which we have introduced the world over and has become a pest in many places. Jackals do reasonably well. These are species actually that may even thrive in the presence of human modifications of landscape. Crows, other examples are there. Species like pigs that are reproductively very prolific and are very resilient. So they do manage, you can have people and nature in the context of these kind of species. Other species, the story gets a little subtle. This is a four-horned antelope, the only living mammal with four horns. All its relatives went extinct a million years ago. So now they benefit from some degradation that human impose on the landscape, but it's so fragile, so low density, with any slightly increased activity or hunting, it gets eliminated. We have vultures now. Probably, vulture numbers increase with the incursion of humans and livestock in India. Probably the biomass of livestock was so much, we had huge densities of vultures, far more than what the nature probably supported 50,000 years ago. But with a single veterinary drug, we wiped out the vultures. So, does it coexist with people or doesn't it coexist? Can we coexist with nature? The definition of what is nature and what is coexistence becomes a little questionable as you look at the variety of creatures that we kind of club under nature. Blackbird, another example. One found in the thousands in the plains of India, but in some parts of India. There are parts of India you don't find it. So its functioning, its survival in these landscapes is because it's tolerated because of religious or cultural reasons. So you see it in some places, in identical habitats in the Deccan, further south, you don't see it because people don't view it the same way. Species that have very wide ranges from rainforests to diverse areas. So my primary talk, my example comes from species that we are coming to a spectrum of less and less ability to coexist with human beings. Sloth bears do exist in some parts of the country, but in many parts of the country they have been lost. Leopard is a classic example. My student Vidya Atreya, who did a study on leopards, showed in areas where there is some tolerance and a huge amount of garbage and thousands of feral dogs on which it can prey, it lives at very high densities. We found densities comparable to good parks in some of the areas in Maharashtra because 90% of the diet was domestic dogs and domestic cats, unowned domestic dogs and cats. So this is a coexistence of some sort. But as you get into some of these other species, this business of interspersion of human settlements and wildlife becomes more and more problematic. Elephants have been wiped out from a large part of the country. Even in Karnataka, the northern half of their range has gone in the last 100 years. Even every year about 50 human beings are killed by elephants in Karnataka and millions of rupees of crop damage. A species that is very difficult to coexist with, although it looks very cute. Then there are species that almost get eliminated with human use of the land, like dhole or Asiatic wild dog. Species that are viewed as large packets of meat and get hunted out very rapidly. Ungulates like cheetal and sambar and gaur, no steroids, nothing, just on bamboo. Look at the muscles. So again, these species go because they represent large packets of energy and meat for consumption. So the tolerance for them is extremely low because of that reason. So, and they also, some of them raid crops. Then we come to some of the most difficult parts of nature that we can conserve. species like rhino, where the commercial value is so huge, so enormous, that people are taking incredible risks, going with AK-47 to shoot them. And they will shoot the guards who will try to stand in their way. In South Africa now we have people who come land in helicopters in some of these reserves with machine guns, shooting rhinos, just taking the horn and disappearing. South Africa has lost 600 rhinos because of the affluence in China. China has created a huge middle class market, a huge wealthy class, which now wants to live like their old masters did, consuming these rare products like rhino horn or bear bile or whatever that was considered a status symbol among the rich. Now billions of consumers, not billions, millions, few hundred million consumers are ready to take this. So these species become extremely difficult. Now rhinos survive in India in Kaziranga only because there are 200 armed camps, 2 guys on patrol with shoot at sight orders. Otherwise we would have had rhinos. So the linkages, and some of these species are not even, in the case of lion-tailed monkey or the great pied hornbill, their niches are so narrow, they are found only in primary rainforests which are not logged too badly, not too many products removed. Some guy goes to collect, for example, lion-tailed monkey lives only in South Indian rainforest of a certain type. The forest is disturbed, they can't make it. And it's hunted in a separate reason. Just the niche is so narrow. You look at the Nilgiri Thar, goat-like animal that was, all its relatives are in the Himalayas, in the Central Asia and all. It is the only survivor in the Western Ghats of the last 20,000 years ago when the climate changed. This remnant population got left, and it's found only in a narrow strip of land which is now being squeezed in by tea plantations and other pressures, and it lives only on these kind of places. So some of these species are very narrow niches and for various reasons. And the tiger, like the rhino, is a big problem. One, it's got commercial value. Second, it's a dangerous beast that eats people and cows. So it poses a huge problem. So when I talk about certain solutions in this talk or certain approaches to conservation, my focus is primarily on some of these types of creatures rather than the first set of species that I talked about, like the mongoose or species that can and do tolerate human use and presence. So what I am now going to scale down to is not really proposed. I actually believe too much theorizing is extremely bad in conservation. Conservation is a field, it's an applied field, and a lot of it is empirical, trial and error. You learn more from your mistakes than from building great predictive models. And, so I'm going to scale down a little and focus a little more on tiger in that sense, so that the detail of what is needed in terms of saving some of these species emerges for a discussion. Tiger was voted as the world's most popular animal in a global poll, and that continues to be true today. So it presents a good case study actually, and it's India's national animal, and a lot of attention and money certainly has gone into it, to the extent that some of the other species guys are screaming, saying, "You tiger guys are taking everything from us." So what's the status? If you look at the tiger habitat today, at one time tigers covered 30 of present-day countries. Today they are found in 12 countries. They covered 30 of the present-day countries, going all the way to the borders of Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Caspian Sea, the southern part of Central Asia, the Russian Far East, all of Southeast Asia, till the island of Bali, just 200 years ago. In the last 200 years, the tiger's range has shrunk by 93%. So they now occupy only 7% of what they occupied just 200 years ago. Furthermore, of all the living existing tigers, according to best estimates, out of this remaining 7% habitat, remaining tigers are basically, the functioning populations are concentrated in 7% of that 7%. So we are talking about a very tiny fraction of Asia. So when I say all these solutions, it's not that I'm demanding the whole tiger be brought back in the whole range. I'm talking about 7% of 7% for a continent with 2 billion people and the fastest economic growth rate. So, that context needs to be viewed. So there are two ways of viewing this. There is tigers almost gone, and people have periodically predicted its extinction. Going back to Jim Corbett in 1931 said that the tiger will be extinct in India by 1955. He was wrong, and everybody who has done the predictions have been wrong so far, which is very good. So the other way to look at it, which is the way I prefer to look at it, there is 1 million square kilometers of tiger habitat still left, out of which roughly 200,000 or 300,000 are in India, rest are in Russian Far East and Southeast Asia. So if we are smart, there is still places you can recover tigers. So I would prefer to view it that way rather than, but the threats are genuine. Even the surviving populations are targeted because of the high value in oriental markets. This is a jaw-trapped tiger in Tadoba. The other major pressure on tigers not much recognized is that the tiger's food is taken away. Tigers have lost 93% of their range, not because they have been hunted, because they had lost a lot of this range even before the Chinese medicine business boomed. People had simply cleared out. You go to all of Northeast, much of Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, tigers are not there because no Chinamen ate them, because they were cleaned out even before the Chinamen arrived. The prey had been taken out, and that's something I'll get into. So given all this, still I believe we have done the best job compared to any other country, and one reason is our culture. The Hindu culture's tolerance or recognition of man as a part of nature, not because of any superiority, simply because it's the oldest polytheistic religion. It came a long time before, where man wasn't as strong to control nature. Perhaps that's the reason why this view. But it does help us to some extent. I have been to situations where people have been killed by elephants and talk to the relatives and say, should we shoot all the elephants? And still he says, no, don't shoot them, but they shouldn't be here. So this you don't hear in Wyoming or Brazil or South Africa. So to me that's an important part of it. But often many conservation biologists think this is enough. Even trained PhD scientists think this is enough to achieve conservation. And that's where I disagree. I think we need to go way beyond this. This sentiment culture is a good thing. We need to build on it. And the only thing that will solve the problem is building it on a robust foundation of science. Whether it is warding off starvation or improving our life expectancy from 30 years to 60 years now, or whatever, it has been based on reason, logic, and ultimately science. I think if you discard that and rely just on tradition and emotion, I don't think we will succeed in conservation. Unfortunately, we don't have a strong foundation of science in wildlife, or didn't have. Now, of course, there's a lot of good wildlife scientists, but that's recent. For many years, we had a conservation movement that was modern conservation movement. Movement was from the 70s. There was no tradition of science. It was a bureaucratic, top-down, protection-oriented thing which did work, but there was no science. There was no understanding of the thing. So my own kind of examples come from my work. So, I'll kind of recount it more like a personal tale from now on. I was an engineering student. I went to engineering because in 1965, if you were a South Indian and had good marks, you went to engineering or medicine. So I chose engineering for a job. But I hated it, and I read in 1965 in the Life magazine an article by the great biologist George Schaller, a 1.5-page article saying my year with tigers. It changed me. I said, this is what I want to do. I don't want this gaudy engineering. So I kind of steered my life from 1965 for the next 20 years heading towards being a wildlife scientist. It took that long. I got to work as an engineer. I sold tractors. I actually farmed for 8 years, not far from Nagarpale. But all this stuff I learned out of the conservation biology classroom is what stands me in good stead today as I practice conservation. It's like what they don't teach you at Harvard Business School. You learn from lots by selling tractors to farmers and being a farmer, not necessarily through a coursework in conservation biology. But anyway, I ended up getting a graduate degree in University of Florida in the 80s, and the same Dr. Schaller ended up hiring me and I started my work in Nagarhole, kind of continuing the, how do you save tigers? First thing is it's a predator which is linked to so much prey, and you really need to understand its biology. At that point in time, there had been one good study in Chitwan, but that was a very, very different system. So I was very interested in understanding tigers, what they need in my backyard, which was the Western Ghats. This is the landscape I grew up in. I wandered and I despaired when I was a schoolboy that whether I will see a living tiger. So this was the first telemetry study, putting a radio collar on tigers and studying their movements. Then of course Raghu, who is here, did a fantastic study following in my footsteps later. So it was the first sketches of what a tiger needs. So it was astonishing what a little bit of science tells you. I had colleagues studying tigers in Russia who found a single female required 600 square kilometers of area to raise 3 cubs. The female I collared was doing it in 15 square kilometers. What does this mean? She needs so little space. It's the same size, eats the same prey, everything is the same. What it means is that the ecology of Karnataka is very different from Russia. And although Nagarhole is very small, 600 square kilometers, if it was in Russia, it could hold 1 tigress, it could hold 30 tigresses. So it gave me hope in the sense that although our parks are small, we have just 1 or 2% of the land under tiger reserve, there's a lot of scope. There was no methodology for counting tigers. They were using track count, it simply didn't work. So there was the issue of the, first of all, if you have to know whether conservation is working or not, you need to know what's happening to tigers. How do you count them? Government had developed a system which had almost become like a religion of using tracks to count tigers. It didn't work. I said it didn't work and didn't make me any popular with any of these guys for many years. But I was trying to develop an alternative method of using automated cameras, and it's actually, it works really well. These were cheap cameras, not expensive cameras, which had been done, but I had to deploy hundreds of them, so it had to be cheap. So these were automated camera traps, and I was able to, this was in the 90s, I was able to get pictures, give them IDs, because the stripes are unique, like human fingerprints, and you can count them. So this work was done in the 90s, and now you hear it being done everywhere in the country, so you can imagine the pace of our progress. So, but the key challenge then in science is, okay, you got some tigers, how do you know you got everybody? So the key challenge is not just counting tigers, but estimating what proportion you caught. So there's a lot of sophisticated stats and maths and modeling that goes into it, which I had to go in. Fortunately, being an engineer, it was a little easy for me. So developing a completely new sampling approach, a modeling approach to estimate numbers. Again, the same issue with prey. People said there are 900 gaur in Nagarhole. I applied the proper sampling methods, which accounts for the fact that you miss a lot of animals when you count, and actually there are 4,000, not 900. So in this case it was reversed. The numbers were actually much higher than what the government said. So using these, I set out to test a simple idea. Based on observing tigers, Schaller, the scientists in Chitwan, and I had all found, and later Raghu found, that a tiger typically takes 1 prey a week. That means a tiger requires 50 animals roughly to support it, the top of that structure. But to produce 50 animals every year, you need 500 prey. So if a single living tiger means there is 500 prey there. So that's really the driver of tiger survival, tiger viability. And I wanted to test this. So we went across India for about 10 years, measuring tigers and prey numbers. And actually this 1 tiger to 500 prey turned out to be very rigorously provable. Again, plans showing very clearly, those are all different reserves. You see the reserves on the right are doing well. They have high prey and high tiger density. But the interesting thing was parks like Tadoba, Bhadra, Panna, Pench, they all had the same potential. So what was required was really pushing up prey numbers. So armed with this knowledge, I grew up in this landscape, and as I said, as a schoolboy, I never, I was seeing the devastation of this landscape in the 50s and 60s. So I wanted to engage this science. I began as a conservation activist actually. So I was very sure that I wanted to engage with others, because I couldn't make a difference as a scientist. So I started working very closely with the forest department's lower level employees and also local youngsters who came saying we want to volunteer. And most of them ran away after I gave them some tough work, because it's very romantic, sounds very romantic, but you go there, pick up tiger poop, dig into tiger gills, get bitten by ticks and chased by elephants, people don't stay. So, but about 10% stayed. So it was slowly like building a militant network. It took a long time. But once you have this network of people in place, what happens is they grow up and they become respected members of the society. One's uncle is a judge, the other one's father is a police inspector, the third one owns the local KBTV, the other guy owns the local tabloid. So you develop a complete social network, not this kind, but the real kind, flesh and blood. And they become very, very powerful guardians of wildlife, because they have walked the forest, they have understood the science, and they can also deal with the reality of a small town like Madikeri or Chikmagalur or Hunsur or whatever is around these tigers. So when the poaching crisis came, we realized suddenly, for example, that although the demand was global by the wildlife trade, the bottommost link in the chain was local tribals who are specialized killers of wildlife. I mean, this is a big problem. So if you don't recognize that this chain exists and simply say the problem is China, it's not going to go away. So supporting enforcement clearly is required. For these kind of species, if you say it's all going to happen because people love nature and I love tigers, and it doesn't work. You need, because the kind of people who are after tigers for the products are not the kind of people who you can reason with. They need to be stopped with force. So at the bottommost level, this is what's trying to stop them. So it's critical. For example, this is D.V. Girish, who is a local coffee planter, who engages massively with these lower level forest employees, listens to their grievances. Sometimes they are not paid their full salaries. It's pocketed by someone above them. So you need to address these problems. They are arrested for catching a poacher, and then you have to post bail bond for them. These kind of interventions conservation biologists can't do. You need people like Girish to do this. And increasingly, supporting the forest department was really important for enforcement. But a new threat, particularly in the last 10 years, has been the increased interest in tigers, and wildlife in general has led to the flow of money into these reserves. Very large sums of money, a trend set by a very bad World Bank project supported by GEF in early 2000. And these large sums of money, once they come anywhere in India, the worst people migrate. And this is happening, and parks are actually being manipulated and mismanaged big time with this kind of excessive funding, needless water. This is water conservation inside a tiger reserve. Percolation pits, why do you need it? I mean, once the money comes, it is spent. So this has become a new threat. So when I say support the forest department, I don't mean blanket support. I mean support for the right things and very tough stand against the wrong things. And this is again where most people don't want to go, because once you confront the system strikes back. So all I have covered so far is about short term, 500 square kilometers, one reserve, how do you fight, what is required to save it. And it really, in some sense, will come to naught, because if we don't address the other problem, because there are settlements even within some of these core important wildlife areas. What do you do with this kind of a situation? It looks idyllic for us, but when you go closer, this is a big Google map, this is a settlement 20 kilometers away from anything with a little paddy field. It's a huge stage for confrontation between wildlife and humans. You grow coconuts, you grow coconuts, and you have elephants around you, then they're going to come. They're going to come because of the nutrition. This man's rice crop is completely ravaged by elephants. And retaliation follows. People are not going to take this lying down. They do kill elephants. You have livestock and tigers, they will kill them. People, livestock are dumb. Tigers will nail them much more easily than wild prey. So again, a huge confrontation. In the end, the wild tigers get eliminated. So it's very clear that these kind of mixtures of people, livestock, agriculture in very high wildlife priority areas sets up a confrontation in which wildlife gets eliminated. This person actually had his scalp ripped off by a bear. I had to put him in a truck and take him, and he lived. He went to a hospital. It's not romantic to be ripped off by a bear. So what we have tried to do is, how do you address this problem? The initial policy of the government was to simply throw them away. And when the Wildlife Protection Act was brought in, the rights of some of the peoples were not even recognized. The issue is, you have to find a new location, you have to make it a win-win, which is very complex. But we were able to do that to some extent because by then there was a very large network of people, NGOs around each of these sites who were very determined, who were very dedicated to provide win-win solutions. Mr. Muthana, who is my assistant director, he's a journalist. He started as a human rights activist, but he is now very much involved in our relocation project. He has the empathy of working with these people, working with local religious leaders. Mr. Girish goes and harangues bureaucrats and makes sure these relocation projects work. We were able to create a model project because the pressure he could bear on the bureaucracy to deliver on ground. So as a result, people did get better housing, they got prosperous agriculture, away from conflict. We got involved. I started as an engineer, wanted to do tigers, but then we are involved in all these things like this old ladies' health and school kids' education. All this comes. This has to be a part of conservation. You can't just say we are for wildlife, but we're not going to deal with the people issues. You have to deal with the people issues, but with a clear head. Mixing people and tigers and elephants is not dealing with the people issues. It is creating problems for both, unsolvable problems which then nobody addresses. So we have even tried private projects where we have funded relocation. This man was in the middle of Kudremukh National Park suffering ravages from his crops, getting beaten up by the police one day and the Naxals the next day. So we bought him land and he's thriving outside. So the places from where these people have moved, like this is 500 buffaloes and 6 families moved out, the habitat recovered, and today we have cow in this place. So this is very long term. So there is short term, there is long term, very long term, and solutions have to be constructive, practical, and deal with every bit of detail. And this can't be done by scientists. Science can give the vision, science cannot implement this. You need to have conservationists who understand science to do. But to me, in the end, I am a biologist. To me, a measure of success is important. Because one of the big problems of the conservation movement is that we are very good at telling stories, success stories, but we hardly ever measure results. So to me, a conservation success is not what, you may have moved people, you have made them happy, you may have increased the, employed more guards, you have done all the right things. To me, those are indirect measures. The right metric is what's happening to tigers. So to me, at the core of it is still science. You've got to count tigers. So we have the largest tiger monitoring program in the world in this landscape. We do about 5,000 square kilometers of intensive monitoring using cameras. So whatever I am saying here has worked. There is data to show actually that tigers have recovered. And it's an ongoing process. See, these young guys look the same, but I keep growing older, unfortunately. So the data clearly show that these tiger populations are doing well. And to me, this is very heartening because these densities are among the highest. Actually, the current year's data show that tigers, just in Bandipur and Nagarhode, we have more than 200 tigers now. And we lose tigers because they have high mortality rates. That doesn't matter. They have 20% annual mortality from fighting, from dispersal, and the population doesn't dip. So we have to view it in that frame rather than every time a tiger dies, I see emails going, people crying, and that's not the issue. Tigers do die. There are species that have high turnover rates. The issue is, are you measuring numbers? Are you monitoring the population? So then you can say these deaths don't matter. I mean, it's not about being sentimental about individual tigers. It's clearly about populations because that's how science looks. We have even documented dispersal through this landscape. One animal moved 300 kilometers, another animal moved 180 kilometers. So to me, it's something I really can't believe I'm seeing this in some sense because when I was growing up in the same landscape, In the same areas where I'm counting about 350 to 400 tigers now, there were not more than 50 in the 60s. And they were on their last legs. They were being poisoned, the forest was being cut. So after 50 years, I'm saying things are better. It's not that everything because we did. It has to do with the fact that we got strong wildlife laws in the 70s because of Mrs. Gandhi's leadership. Whatever, a number of historical factors. But the thing is, by acting rationally, you can recover nature of this kind, the most difficult kind of nature to recover. And this has to be based on the best of science. It can't be emotion, it can't be religion, it can't be... all those elements are required, but it can't be the core. And to me, the science is about the best of science. We are now, sorry, I'm running a little late. We are collaborating, building a better camera trap, working with the Intel Corporation. Their CEO came, he got charged up, and so we're building something new. We work with the best of computer statisticians, wildlife statisticians in the world, because science keeps moving. India's wildlife science kind of freezes or decays. Like we developed a new tiger counting method in 2006, and now that's frozen. It's not changing. But these fields are evolving every day. We developed a new pattern matching software working with a Cambridge mathematician to rapidly identify individual tigers. New statistical techniques for estimating numbers, mapping those numbers, how to do surveys of large landscapes, and putting it all out in the public domain. I work for Wildlife Conservation Society, which is an NGO, non-profit, so we put this stuff out. It's all available in public domain, and a lot of the conservation stuff is actually available in the regional language in Kannada, but the media's role and government, I'm not completely negative. They sometimes show some interest, and slowly they do absorb things. So, sum and substance of it, starting from that bleak view of the tiger situation when I was 15 years old, 50 years later, I do believe tigers are a resilient species. They reproduce, there are plus going forward. They reproduce rapidly. Female produces 15 cubs in her lifetime. They disperse long distance. So the future of the tigers is not this. I don't see this at all. It's more like this. Now, we have to, there's a tendency on the part of us to view all progress as negative towards nature. I don't share that view. In this landscape, this is not science. This is simply one person's observation. In that landscape, there are 7 times more tigers, another lot more people. There were 300 some crore people in India when I was born. They are now 1 billion plus. Economic growth rate was the Hindu rate of 3% at that time. It's whatever, much more. So a lot of things have changed, and not all of this is negative to conservation. This is my point. I think some of it, the demographic shift from 80% agriculture to 55% agriculture, a lot of it is taking pressure off the land. A lot of it is changing traditions. When I was a little boy in a Puttur village, spotlight and hunting a civet was the sport. Everybody did it. Today they watch IPL or something on TV. Drive for protein. This is documented by studies in Africa. Need for protein is one of the fundamental things that drives subsistence hunting. Today, every 100 meters there is a wire mesh cage and a chicken center, what they call chicken center, every place in Karnataka. So this whole business of hunting, walking miles to eat a civet is going. People do hunt, but a lot of things, changing traditions, changing consumption patterns. Labor wage was 3 rupees per day for a man. It's 300 rupees now in the same landscape. So a lot of it is in our favor. Yes, the mines, the energy production, a lot of it is against. But let's not view technology and progress as just enemies, and somehow we can simply roll back to the 12th century and reclaim a world that was pristine and natural. We can save Western Ghats by ignoring 1.2 crore people live there with aspirations. We can't. So this is a trial and error. I'm making no claims for a great model. This is a trial and error which I think works where there is a robust middle class, like it does in Karnataka, the 4 southern states, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Bengal, Assam. You have a robust middle class which has a social voice. I'm not sure it will work in the more feudal parts of North India or in northeastern hill states and the tribal belt of India. I'm not saying it's a universal model, but I think science is about testing models against data. Thank you.